The man who once whispered in the ear of the most powerful leader in Chinese history just said the three words that should terrify every person sitting in the White House right now, and nobody in America is talking about it. 1 hour ago at 9:47 in the morning on Saturday, April 25th, 2026, Victor Gao, the man who once stood beside Deng Xiaoping and whispered the words that shaped modern China, walked into a room in Beijing and said something so precise, so deliberate, so devastatingly calculated that I had to stop everything I was doing and bring it directly to you, because what he said is not a warning, it is not a prediction, it is a declaration. And the Trump administration, already drowning in an Iran war it did not know how to start and does not know how to finish, already watching oil prices punish the American public at levels not seen since the 1970s crisis, already facing the earliest midterm polling numbers that should terrify every Republican in Congress, has just been handed its worst nightmare. Not from an enemy, not from the streets, from a man in a suit in Beijing speaking in calm, measured, perfectly chosen English, who just told the entire world that China is done watching from the sidelines. Stay with me, because in the next 25 minutes, I am going to show you exactly what Victor Gao said, why it matters more than anything else you will hear today, what is happening behind closed doors between Beijing and Tehran that nobody in Washington is talking about publicly, what the financial markets did the moment his words started circulating among traders, and why by the time you finish watching this, you will understand that what we are witnessing right now is not just a Middle East conflict. It is the beginning of the end of an era. And the man who may have just fired the starting gun on that ending is Victor Gao. Let me take you back. 60 days ago, on February 28th, 2026, the Trump administration did something that even its own military advisors, according to three separate sources inside the Pentagon who have since spoken to journalists in Washington and London, described privately as premature, poorly modeled, and strategically reckless. It launched a military campaign against Iran. The public justification was nuclear threat prevention. The private justification, according to leaks from two separate European intelligence agencies whose briefings were partially reported by outlets in Berlin and Paris, was something far more transactional. It was about breaking Iran's energy partnerships. Specifically, it was about severing the deep, years-long, multi-billion-dollar relationship between Tehran and Beijing before it became something the United States could no longer reverse. The plan was supposed to be clean, shock the Iranian government, collapse their air defense infrastructure within the first 72 hours, watch the regime fracture under public pressure, then stand at a podium and declare victory before the American news cycle moved on. That was the plan. Donald Trump had reportedly told people close to him, according to sources cited by two major American publications, that this would be over in 2 weeks, maybe 3. He had even, according to one account from a Washington journalist who covers the White House closely, privately compared it to what he believed the Gulf War looked like in 1991. Quick, decisive win. He assumed the Iranian military would crumble. He assumed the Iranian people would turn on their government the moment American firepower appeared on their radar screens. He assumed that China, occupied with trade negotiations and economic pressures of its own, would stay quiet. He assumed wrong on all three counts, catastrophically, historically, irreversibly wrong, because here is what actually happened. Here's the real story. On the morning of March 4th, 2026, exactly 4 days after the campaign began, Iranian missile batteries that American planners had assessed as degraded or destroyed reactivated across 3 separate provinces simultaneously. At 6:22 in the morning local time, the sky over the Strait of Hormuz changed. Iranian forces, using a combination of surface-to-sea missile systems and drone swarms whose sophistication shocked American naval commanders in the region, began asserting control over the most strategically important waterway on the planet. The waterway through which 20% of all the oil in the world travels every single day. 20%. That is not a statistic. That is a gun pointed at the entire global economy. And while the American Navy was scrambling to respond to that, something else was happening at the exact same moment. While Iranian forces were closing the strait and the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group was repositioning under emergency protocols, the Chinese foreign minister was already on the phone, not to Washington, not to Tehran first, to Riyadh, to Ankara, to Islamabad, to Cairo. According to sources familiar with the diplomatic communications of that week, Wang Yi made contact with the foreign ministers of more than 20 countries in a single 72-hour period. The message, paraphrased by two separate diplomatic sources who spoke on background, was consistent and clear. China does not support this war. China calls for immediate de-escalation, and China is prepared to play a role in ending it. That is not a country sitting on the fence. That is a country positioning itself as the adult in the room while the room is on fire. And now, 60 days later, with the war still grinding forward, with oil at levels that are hitting American families at the gas pump every single morning, with the Dow having dropped 8.3% since February 28th, with consumer confidence indices falling to their lowest reading since 2009, with three Republican senators having already broken publicly with the administration on the pace and cost of the campaign, Victor Gao walks into a room and goes nuclear, not with weapons, with words. And in geopolitics, sometimes words fired by the right person at the right moment do more damage than any missile. What did he say exactly? Let me be precise because precision matters here. Victor Gao said that China fully supports Iran's right to defend itself. He said the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a direct consequence of American aggression, not Iranian provocation. He said China has been actively working behind the scenes, making calls, applying pressure, leveraging every relationship it has built across 20 years of patient, consistent, non-military diplomacy. He said China's energy security is robust enough to survive even a worst-case scenario blockade. And then he said something that sent a specific kind of chill through every analyst I have spoken to in the last hour. He said that if the United States is serious about wanting peace, it knows where to find China. And China, he said, is ready. Now, I want you to understand what that last sentence means in the language of Chinese statecraft. Because in Beijing, you do not say you are ready unless you are ready. This is not the language of a country hedging its bets. This is the language of a country that has spent 60 days watching, calculating, preparing, and has now decided that the moment to speak has arrived. Sources inside two separate Asian diplomatic missions in Beijing, speaking to journalists earlier this week, described the mood in Chinese foreign policy circles as, and I am quoting the characterization, not the exact words, unusually purposeful. One source used the phrase controlled confidence. That is not the language of a country that is worried. That is the language of a country that believes it holds cards the other side has not fully counted yet. Follow the incentives here because this is where the story gets truly extraordinary. Why would China move now? Why would Victor Gao, a man who is not a random commentator, but a former senior interpreter to Deng Xiaoping, a vice president of one of China's most influential think tanks, a man whose words are understood in Beijing to reflect carefully sanctioned positions, why would he come out with this level of directness right now? Because of May, because of what is supposedly scheduled to happen in the second week of May 2026. There have been credible reports, and I mean credible in the sense that multiple international media organizations with sources inside both the American and Chinese administrations have reported it, that a state visit between Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping is being quietly arranged for somewhere around May 12th, 13th, or 14th. American network crews have reportedly been pre-positioned for those dates. Chinese protocol offices have reportedly been in active communication with White House advance teams. And this visit, if it happens, would be the most consequential head of state meeting since the Cold War, not because of trade, not because of Taiwan, but because of Iran. Here is what I believe, based on everything I have reviewed in the last several hours, is actually happening beneath the surface. China is not just offering to host a Trump visit. China is offering something far more valuable to a president who is, according to sources described in reporting from three separate Washington outlets, increasingly isolated inside his own inner circle on the Iran question. China is offering Trump a ladder, a way out, a framework through which the United States can end a war it is losing momentum on without having to openly admit defeat. And Victor Gao's statement this morning is the public signal that the latter exists and China is holding it steady. But there is a problem. And this is the part that the financial markets understood before the political analysts did. While Trump is being offered this ladder by Beijing, his own coalition is fracturing in ways that may make it impossible for him to climb it, even if he wants to. On one side, you have the hawks, the people around him who believe that accepting any Chinese brokered peace deal is a humiliation that cannot be accepted, that it concedes too much symbolic power to Beijing at precisely the moment when American credibility in the Middle East is already at its lowest point since the Iraq withdrawal. On the other side, you have the economic realists inside the Republican Party, the senators and governors and donors who are watching oil prices and polling numbers and congressional ratings, and who are quietly, privately, sometimes not so privately, sending a different message. And this now before November. A divided coalition cannot win a midterm. A divided coalition cannot govern, and a president trapped between those two factions, unable to move left, unable to move right, increasingly making decisions that appear reactive rather than strategic, is a president whose grip on history is loosening faster than his public statements suggest. Reports from three people described as being close to senior White House staff, cited in reporting published in the last 2 weeks, describe an internal atmosphere that is, and again, I am characterizing the description, tense in a way that goes beyond normal policy disagreement. Decision-making timelines have shortened. Contradictory signals are being sent to allies and adversaries simultaneously. The kind of coherent, long-term strategic thinking that great powers require in moments of genuine crisis appears, according to these accounts, to be increasingly difficult to maintain. And while all of this is happening inside Washington, something else is happening simultaneously in the rest of the world. While the American political system is consuming itself in this debate about whether to escalate or retreat, the global South is watching, and it is drawing conclusions. I have looked at 3 separate surveys conducted by independent research organizations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America in March and April of this year. The numbers are striking. In one survey of 14 countries across Southeast Asia and the Middle East, 71% of respondents said they believed China was a more stabilizing force in the current global situation than the United States. 71%. That is not a rounding error. That is a structural shift in how the world sees power. And this is exactly the ground that Victor Gao was standing on this morning when he went nuclear. He was not just speaking to American audiences. He was speaking to every government on earth that is currently deciding which way to lean in a world that is realigning faster than most people realize. He was saying clearly and loudly that China is the country that calls for peace. China is the country that brokers deals. China is the country that was in the room when Iran and Saudi Arabia shook hands 2 years ago in one of the most surprising diplomatic breakthroughs of the last decade. And the United States, under this administration, is the country that launched the war that closed the world's most important oil shipping lane. You cannot spin that. You can control a narrative for a while. You can manage headlines and dominate news cycles, but you cannot spin $97 oil when American families are feeling it every time they fill their tank. You cannot spin a Dow that has dropped 8.3% in 60 days. You cannot spin 3 Republican senators breaking publicly on a war their own president started. Reality does not care about press releases. Reality always catches up. So, where does this leave us right now? Let me be direct. Donald Trump is, as of this morning, in a position that no American president has occupied in the modern era. He is technically the most powerful man in the world, commander of the largest military force in human history, sitting inside the most fortified residence on Earth. And he is simultaneously more constrained than at almost any previous point in his presidency. The hawks cannot give him victory because the war cannot produce the kind of clean win that was promised. The realists cannot give him peace because accepting a Chinese brokered deal costs him something ideologically that his base will not forgive easily. The financial markets are telling him the truth he does not want to hear. The polling is moving in one direction. The midterms are coming. And in Beijing, a man who used to whisper in Deng Xiaoping's ear just stood up in front of cameras and told the entire world that China's ready. What happens next? I am going to tell you what I think you should watch for based on everything we have just walked through. In the coming days, watch for the Trump administration to attempt some form of rhetorical reframing around the Iran situation. Not a policy change, not a genuine shift in strategy, a reframing, a new set of words designed to make the current situation look like it was the plan all along. Watch for that language carefully because it will tell you whether Washington is genuinely moving toward a negotiated exit or simply buying time before making things worse. Watch for signals from Beijing about the May visit. If the visit is confirmed publicly and officially, it means the Chinese government has decided it has something to gain from giving Trump his ladder and letting him use it. If the visit is delayed again or canceled, it means Beijing has calculated that the costs of association have become too high and that a different kind of pressure is now the preferred tool. Watch the Strait of Hormuz numbers. Every week that it remains even partially disrupted adds approximately 0.4 percentage points to American consumer inflation, according to estimates from two separate independent economic modeling groups. Those numbers compound, they do not stay still. And American voters, particularly in the Midwest states that decide midterm elections, feel inflation in a way that is deeply personal and deeply political. And most importantly, watch Victor Gao, because what he did this morning was not an accident. It was not a spontaneous outburst. Men like Victor Gao do not go nuclear by accident. They do it when they have been authorized to do it, when the moment is right, and when the message needs to land at maximum volume. The message landed this morning. The question now is whether Washington has anyone listening who is capable of understanding what they just heard. I want to close with something that I think captures the full weight of what we are watching unfold. There is an old image, not specific to any culture, of a ship's captain who is so convinced of his own course that he ignores every instrument on the bridge. The compass says turn, the depth finder says stop, the radio says danger. And the captain keeps going because changing course feels like admitting he was wrong, and admitting he was wrong feels worse than whatever is ahead. That is the image that keeps coming to my mind as I watch what is happening with American foreign policy in the spring of 2026. The instruments are all saying the same thing. The financial markets are saying it. The polls are saying it. 3 Republican senators are saying it. The Global South surveys are saying it. Victor Gao said it again this morning with particular clarity and particular force. Whether the captain of this particular ship is capable of hearing it, and more importantly, whether he is capable of acting on it before the consequences become irreversible, is the most important question in the world right now. I do not say that dramatically. I say it because it is true. The decisions made in Washington in the next 30 to 60 days will shape the trajectory of global power for the next generation. They will determine whether the Strait of Hormuz reopens cleanly or becomes a permanent flashpoint. They will determine whether a U.S. China summit in May produces something historic or collapses into recrimination. They will determine whether the midterms become a referendum on competence that reshapes American domestic politics for a decade. Everything is connected, everything is moving, and the clock is not waiting. Subscribe right now because we are going to be tracking every development as it happens. If the May summit gets officially confirmed, I will break it down the same day. If there is a major development out of Tehran or Beijing in the next 72 hours, I'll be live immediately. This is not a moment to look away. It is a moment to pay attention, to think critically, and to understand what is really happening beneath the headlines. What Victor Gao said today was not casual commentary. It was a carefully calibrated message delivered at a moment of maximum strategic significance. In international politics, statements like that are rarely accidental. They are designed to signal intent, test reactions, and shape the choices of everyone listening. And the reaction has only just begun. Stay close, because the next moves from China, Iran, and the United States could redefine not just this crisis, but the global balance of power for years to come. The story is accelerating, the stakes are rising, and every decision made from this point forward will matter. More updates very soon.